Namaskar. Welcome to the Daily Report. Today, we are going to interact with Mr. Ashley Tellis and we are going to learn more about the LGBTQ community and Article 377 and the Trans Bill and a lot of more information that we as readers are not aware about. Um, Mr. Tellis, welcome to the Daily Report. Um, so, Mumbai, UK, US, Bangalore, Hyderabad, all these years you have been learning and teaching and imparting knowledge. Can you tell us about the journey, how the journey has been, and when did you discover about yourself?
So I come from a generation, I grew up in the 80s. I come from a generation which is very different from what how young people experience the world today. I grew up in a pre-internet time, in a time where actually there was no movement as such. Not that there's a movement now, but there certainly wasn't the kind of efflorescence around LGBT issues that you have today. And I grew up reading in Bombay, reading about the LGBT movement in the US and in the UK, and had very radical um, education through what these guys were doing um, in Western Europe and North America. So I grew up with very different ideas of gay liberation, actually, what it used to be called then, and therefore my whole understanding of LGBT is very different from today's generation. And you would think that with the growth of the internet and with the coming of LGBT into India and so on in a big way, post liberalization, things would have gotten much better. But actually, according to me, they've gotten much worse. And the biggest loss and the biggest problem I see in the LGBT movement is that it doesn't have a political vision. That in fact, what it has is more websites, more social media outlets, more meetings where gay and lesbian people can meet, and more social activities around LGBT, more NGO. Yes, more NGOization, therefore inevitably more marketing. So the LGBT movement in India, you have to understand, does not come out of a political movement. In Western Europe and North America, it came out of a political movement on the streets, right? In the 1960s. Stonewall, for example, which led to all the pride marches that we have today, was actually a bunch of transgender people saying no to police violence and saying that enough is enough in terms of police violence, and that was the great kind of conflagration at the Stonewall Inn in New York. We've not had that kind of movement here at all. LGBT, as I've written elsewhere, came on the back of the neoliberalization and the globalization of the Indian economy. It came via NGOs, it didn't come via any political grassroots movement at all. So therefore, LGBT is a good market, I guess, for the capitalists, which is why there's more and more advertising for them now, because it's like the pink pound in the UK or the pink dollar in the United States. Gay men are a good market. Lesbian women are a good market because we don't marry, we don't reproduce, therefore we have more money to spend on capitalist shopping. So it's not really a political movement at all, as far as I'm concerned. And one example to give you, there are so many examples I can give you, but one example is the recent conflagration that you must have read about in Bombay Pride and Pune Pride and so on, where actually members of the so-called queer community were eager to hand in their own members who were protesting perfectly democratically against uh, a, a law that they were not in favor of, the NPR and the CAA and the NRC, and they were handed over to the police pretty much on a platter by members of the queer community. So, what is the queer community? A conservative, nationalist, state-loving. They were actually saying stupid, unbelievable things like pride is not political and we should not bring politics into pride. When, if you know anything about the history of pride marches, they are absolutely political, and they are absolutely part of a political movement for gay rights, firstly. So, it just seems to me shocking, but also symptomatic that this kind of right-wing movement exists around LGBT, which is very different from what I grew up with. So actually, I'm completely alienated by the so-called efflorescence of the LGBT movement right now. It's something that I do not relate to. I do not feel part of. It's actually quite an unnerving, quite a frightening experience for me to understand what the so-called LGBT movement today is all about.
Now, I've always seen you as an activist. speaking for the community. Um, you might say that you don't belong to that community, but yeah, we'll talk about it. Can we talk about the discriminations that you have faced over the period of years?
So yeah, first of all, I mean, I don't know whether there's a community at all, as I'm saying. Not just that, not just that I'm not part of the community. I don't know whether we have something like a community.
Organized structure.
Yeah, community is no, even if it's not organized, a community stands by each other. Whereas what I've just told you is that if you're handing over members of your own community to the police, that's not a community. But my own journey, see, I went and did my PhD in Cambridge and came back from there fully aware that I was going to be out, I was going to be public about it, largely because I could afford to, in the sense that I knew that if I was sacked, which I was frequently, again and again, and discriminated against and hated, that I wouldn't care really, or it wouldn't destroy me. I would have other means to earn my living. I'm also a journalist. I'm also an editor. I can do different things and I can survive. And that's really how I have survived in many ways. So my own story has been one of taking risks, but they were risks that I was willing to take. Not because I wanted to be a martyr or some kind of hero, but I thought that people have to come out and really stand by the question of being gay, or this society is never going to even think about it, let alone change. So I was okay with the shit that I faced, except that I faced much more shit than I thought I would. But I really think that if I, with a privileged Cambridge PhD and in some sense enough cultural capital to survive, have faced so much discrimination that right now I'm almost unemployable, think about people who have families to support, who don't have the ability to come out and stand for what they believe in. Think of a disenfranchised hijra who has to survive by begging or sex work. Think of a lower caste gay man or lesbian woman who has to survive. And I think that these, for me, I was hoping that my coming out would make things easier for them. I'm not sure that I succeeded. I see the 20 years or so since I came back from my PhD. I came back when I was about 30. I'm now 50. And I see these 20 years as having achieved very little, actually, having achieved almost nothing. And in some ways, I feel like it's a reverse almost. Things are now worse than what they were 20 years ago. Because I think with invisibilization, at least you can get away with at least living your life. Whereas now with visibilization, you actually have more forms of discrimination that have become apparent. So I don't know, I feel quite cynical and quite pessimistic about what the situation is for LGBT people in general right now.
When you say that these 20 years, you think that you have achieved very little. So do you think the system has been at fault? And talking about the system, let's talk about 377 also.
Yeah.
Like how things have changed, how things haven't changed.
377 movement for me has been a complete failure and a complete mess as far as I'm concerned. So we go back to the 90s and you had a movement like AIDS Bhedbhav Virodhi Andolan in Delhi, which had started some excellent work. I in fact came back, I'm not from Delhi, I'm from Bombay. I came to Delhi to actually work with AIDS Bhedbhav Virodhi Andolan. That was the activism I wanted to do. They were pretty much on their way out as an organization then in terms of active work. They're still around, but they're so marginalized. And the movement was taken over by this legal fight for a reading down of 377. Whereas AIDS Bhedbhav Virodhi Andolan was very clear that they wanted the repeal of Section 377. And their report, Less Than Gay, was the first report that collected voices of the community and clearly called for a repeal of 377. Instead, we settled for this reading down, which doesn't make any sense. What is now legitimate is that you and I can have sex in my bedroom without anyone taking us to jail. But you and I could have sex in my bedroom anyway if I had a bedroom, right? I mean, I didn't need a law to tell me that I could have sex in the privacy of my bedroom.
It should be more about acceptance.
Yes, and what about people who don't have a bedroom, like hijras who have to perform sex work and beg on the roads? What happens to them? How does this law help them? How does this stupid 377 judgment help them? We are in this peculiar position now where we have certain rights, like the right of privacy and sex in the privacy of our bedrooms, but the state doesn't recognize us as a subject. The state knows what a Dalit is. The state knows what an Adivasi is. The state does not recognize a legal category called the homosexual. So we are in this peculiar backdoor position that doesn't make any sense to me. So the first thing that we should have fought for, which was the original fight of the AIDS Bhedbhav Virodhi Andolan in Delhi, was to fight for legal recognition as subjects.
Spoken about 377, now let's talk about the Trans Bill. What are your views into it?
So again, the trans bill is to me a complete mess, just like the 377 struggle. The transgender community, what we are calling the transgender community, is actually the Hijra community, or what we can call in Karnataka the Jogappas, in Tamil Nadu the Tirunangai or the Aravanis, in North India Hijras. These are not transgender. Let's get these categories clear. Transgender is an umbrella US term that actually has no relevance to the third gender population in India. Number one. Number two, that community, which is largely upper caste and upper class, has hijacked this entire bill and made it about them, whereas in fact it's not about them. So actually I was part of a Human Rights Commission and Ministry of Welfare social welfare meeting where there was confusion because on the one hand they were looking about identification and about papers to prove that you're transgender, which is what the state needs. If you're going to approach the law and ask for certain benefits from the state, they have to be able to recognize who you are as a subject. You can't say I'm a gender fluid subject that simply doesn't really believe in any of these categories. That's not how the law and the state work. So if you want mainstreaming, and the really beleaguered community are Hijras, rescue and rehabilitation is one of the things in the bill. Trans people don't need rescue and rehabilitation. These are upper class people who move around society, who pass perfectly well. It's the Hijras who need rescue and rehabilitation, if at all they're interested in that, right? So the way again that the trans bill has not become about the Hijras at all anymore, but it's become about this upper caste trans community from the US oriented understanding of trans is a classic example of how neoliberal the whole understanding of LGBT in this country is. It makes no sense to me, and the fact that the government is buying into this definition, the Wikipedia is the source of the definition in the Nalsa judgment and in the trans bill. So you're going to use that kind of information and definition, you're going to come up with absurd situations where the state doesn't know how to deal with this problem at all now.
My last question would be, what more do you want to do for the community that is not there according to you? But what do you want to do for the community and what the community want like in future?
I want there to be a community to begin with. And I think for that we really need a sense of the political, a sense of the fact that LGBT are, and I don't even want to call it LGBT, but LGBH, because I'm interested in the Hijra community, not so much in the middle class and upper class trans community. But my point is, unless you have a sense of the political, unless you have the sense of your own sense of self as a subject and the fact that you're denied rights, on this basic agenda, if we cannot meet and cannot actually work together, then there's no hope for us. Unless you actually understand that we are in a complex situation where the forces of globalization and the way in which LGBT circulates through NGOization and the way in which LGBT functions as a market commodity also here, unless we are aware of all these things and understand that we're looking at rights and subjecthood, not only from the point of view of the state. Yes, some of us want the state to also recognize us as subjects. Some of us just want to understand what our own histories are. Unless we have this common, basic, universal agenda, there can be no community. Right now, we are not a community. And I'm looking forward to the day when we have a community, because I believe in community. I believe in political struggles. I believe in rights. I believe in minority struggles, like you have a Dalit struggle, you have an Aswathi struggle, and you also have an LGBH struggle, I think. But we haven't even really reached there yet. We haven't even begun a conceptualization of this community. And unless we begin that, I don't see very much changing.
There are a lot of things that we learned today, especially a complete information, I should say, regarding 377, the trans bill, and what the community needs, and more than that, on in what state people are there in our country among us. Thank you, sir, for your time, and thanks a lot for giving us the time. And we wish you all the best for your future endeavors. And you can go on the links of this video and reach out to him if you have any more questions. Thanks a lot for being with us.